What if the person flying your plane wasn't a person at all? In this terrifying true-style story, passengers aboard Flight 739 witnessed something they were never meant to see. A co-pilot without a face. Subscribe to The Last Knock before you watch this chilling aviation horror unfold. The wheels of Flight 739 left Dallas-Fort Worth as the sun set, the last rays of daylight glinting off the fuselage. The runway blurred beneath, then fell away, and the world below shrank into a patchwork of lights and shadows. Above, the sky was a living canvas, painted in wild streaks of orange and purple, the colors deepening as the jet climbed higher. The clouds glowed, then faded, as if the day itself was being pulled away. Inside the cabin, passengers settled in, lulled by the steady hum of the engines and the comforting illusion of safety. A businessman tapped away at his laptop, lost in spreadsheets and deadlines. A couple whispered, their hands entwined, sharing secrets only the clouds could hear. Flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisle, their smiles practiced and warm, offering drinks and small comforts. The clink of ice in plastic cups, the soft rustle of snack wrappers, everything felt routine, almost choreographed. But if you looked closer, beneath the surface of normalcy, there were tiny cracks, nervous glances, restless hands, a tension that seemed to hum just below the laughter and polite conversation. Leo, a young boy with wide, searching eyes, pressed his face to the cold window. He wasn't watching the world below, the twinkling city lights or the endless fields. His gaze was fixed elsewhere, his mind racing. He stared forward toward the cockpit, a knot of fear tightening in his stomach. Every sound seemed louder to him, the click of a seatbelt, the murmur of voices, the distant chime from the flight deck. He'd seen the pilot during boarding, a tall man with a kind smile, his uniform crisp, his voice calm as he welcomed passengers. For most, that smile was reassurance. For Leo, it was a mask he couldn't quite trust. Now, as the plane leveled off, something felt wrong. The air seemed heavier, the shadows deeper. A sense of unease crept through the cabin, unnoticed by most but not by Leo. The plane climbed into darkness, the seatbelt sign pinged off, and the cabin relaxed. Passengers reclined, some closed their eyes, others scrolled through glowing screens. But Leo didn't move, his body rigid with anticipation. He kept his eyes locked on the cockpit door, fists clenched in his lap, knuckles white. Every so often he glanced at the other passengers, searching for someone who might understand, but found only calm faces. Outside, the world had vanished into blackness, broken only by the steady blink of the wingtip light. The stars were hidden, the ground invisible, a void stretching in every direction. Inside, the illusion of safety was complete. The soft glow of reading lights, the gentle murmur of conversation, the warmth of shared space, all of it a fragile shield against the unknown. But for Leo, the real darkness was just beginning. His heart pounded, his breath shallow, as if he could sense something lurking just out of sight. It was inside the plane with them, moving unseen through the shadows, waiting for the moment when no one was watching. The hum of the engines was no longer a lullaby. It was a warning, a low, constant reminder that not everything was as it seemed. And only Leo seemed to hear it, the subtle shift in the air, the whisper of danger. As the night deepened, he knew he was the only one awake to the truth. The real journey was just beginning. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly, as the plane soared above the clouds. The hum of the engines and the soft chatter of passengers filled the cabin with a sense of routine normalcy. But beneath that calm, something unsettling was about to unfold. It began with a whimper. Leo's, a sound so faint it was nearly lost in the drone of flight. His mother, Sarah, glanced up from her paperback, concern flickering across her face. "What is it, sweetie?" she asked, her voice gentle but alert, sensing something was wrong. Leo didn't answer at first. He just shook his head, his small hand trembling as he pointed toward the cockpit door at the front of the plane. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Fear seemed to grip him, making it hard to breathe, let alone talk. Finally, in a trembling whisper, he managed, "The pilot, Mommy. He doesn't have a face." His words were barely audible, but the terror in his eyes was unmistakable. Sarah followed his gaze, her eyes landing on the closed cockpit door. She saw nothing unusual, just the door, flight attendants moving briskly up and down the aisle, and the ordinary bustle of a flight in progress. She reached over, squeezing Leo's hand. "The pilot is flying the plane, honey. He'll get us to Seattle safely, just like always," she reassured, trying to sound confident, though a sliver of doubt crept into her mind. But Leo's terror was raw, primal, something deeper than childish imagination. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest, eyes never leaving the cockpit door. "When we got on, I saw him," Leo insisted, voice shaking. "He turned around. He didn't have a face. Just nothing." The words seemed to freeze the air around them. For a moment the world shrank to just their row, the chilling image hanging between mother and son. Sarah felt a shiver crawl up her spine, despite the warm, recycled air of the cabin. She tried to dismiss it, but the unease lingered. The steady hum of the engines, once comforting, now seemed ominous, like a warning she couldn't quite decipher. Suddenly, Leo let out a scream, a piercing, desperate shriek that cut through the cabin's calm. Every head snapped around, conversation stopped mid-sentence, the atmosphere shifted in an instant. "He's still there! The man with no face! He's flying the plane!" Leo cried, his voice echoing off the walls, panic spreading like wildfire. The idea, once a whispered fear between mother and son, was now a public declaration. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, whispers rippling through the rows. A seed of panic had been planted, and it was growing fast. Faces turned pale, and the sense of safety began to unravel. Now, all eyes were drawn to the cockpit door. The once ordinary barrier now seemed mysterious, even menacing, as if hiding something unspeakable. The tension was palpable. Leo's fear was contagious, infecting the minds of those around him. Even the most skeptical passengers felt a chill. The normal flight was over. The nightmare had begun. And as the plane continued its journey through the sky, everyone on board felt a shadow of dread settle in. Maria, the senior flight attendant, moved quickly to Leo's side. "It's all right, little guy, just a bad dream," she soothed. But Leo wouldn't look at her, only at the cockpit door. Sarah apologized, blaming imagination, but the cabin's mood had shifted. Passengers muttered, eager to dismiss the disturbance, but Maria couldn't shake her unease. She'd seen scared kids before. This was different. "The man with no face," Leo whispered, over and over. Maria offered distractions, but Leo refused, eyes locked on the door. Maria exchanged a worried glance with Ben, her colleague. "Should we call the cockpit?" Ben whispered. Maria hesitated. It was against protocol. But the boy's terror lingered in her mind. "No, we'll wait," she said, voice uncertain. But the word nothing felt like a lie. Doubt crept through the cabin. The panic was already there, waiting. The boy's fear had cracked the foundation of routine. And now, everyone was listening for something, anything, out of place. The flight was no longer normal, it was haunted. Leo drifted into a restless sleep, his mother holding him close, eyes fixed on the cockpit door. The cabin was tense, every bump of turbulence a new alarm. The boy's fear had taken root, wrapping around every heart. The flight attendants forced smiles, but their eyes betrayed them. Maria kept glancing at the cockpit door, a barrier to the unknown. Was Captain Reynolds still in control, or was something else in his seat? Ben paced the aisle, replaying Leo's words. "He doesn't have a face." The feeling of being watched spread. Passengers glanced around, searching for something they couldn't name. Shadows seemed to move, cold spots appeared. The plane felt like a haunted house at 35,000 feet. The rational world was peeling away, they were trapped with a child's nightmare. And the cockpit door stayed ominously closed. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds gripped the yoke, sweat trickling down his back. The hum of the engines was a distant, hollow sound, barely audible over the pounding of his own heart. Every muscle in his body was tense, as if bracing for an impact that hadn't yet come. He hadn't heard the boy scream, but he felt a psychic shockwave, a ripple of terror that seemed to pass through the metal skin of the plane itself. It was as if the air had changed, thickening with invisible static, making every breath feel heavier. Beside him, First Officer Evans sat motionless, staring into the black. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint hiss of the radio and the occasional click of a switch. Reynolds could feel the weight of Evans's presence, or perhaps the absence of it, like a void opening up in the seat next to him. Reynolds reached for the radio, desperate for a human voice, for any sign that the world outside the cockpit still existed. His fingers trembled as he pressed the button, the plastic cool and slick beneath his touch. "Seattle Center, this is Trans-Sky 739, level at 350. His voice sounded thin, almost unrecognizable, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. The reply was routine, a string of words and numbers, but Reynolds barely listened. The normalcy of it felt surreal, like a recording playing in a dream. He focused on not looking at Evans, forcing his gaze forward, afraid of what he might see if he turned his head even slightly. Something was wrong. Evans was too still, too silent. The air around him seemed to vibrate with a strange energy, as if the cockpit itself was holding its breath. Reynolds had tried to talk, but Evans's replies were empty, hollow echoes of normal conversation. Now even those had stopped, replaced by a chilling, unnatural quiet. Now Evans didn't speak at all. He just sat there, unmoving, as if frozen in time. He just sat there, like a mannequin in uniform. The effect was deeply unsettling, as if the man beside him had been replaced by something else entirely. The urge to look was overwhelming, but instinct screamed not to. Every fiber of Reynolds' being told him that to meet Evans's eyes would be to invite something unspeakable. The radio crackled. "Can you confirm your heading?" The voice on the other end sounded distant, distorted by static, as if coming from another world. Reynolds checked the instruments. They were drifting off course. The needles wavered, the numbers flickered, and for a moment he wondered if the plane itself was being pulled by some unseen force. He corrected, hands slick with sweat, fighting the trembling in his fingers. The controls felt heavier, as if resisting his touch. He risked a glance at Evans' hands, too long, too pale, unmoving. The cockpit felt colder, a chill creeping up his spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The thing beside him was not his co-pilot. It wore Evans's uniform, sat in Evans's seat, but whatever spark of humanity had been there was gone. The plane was no longer under his control. The autopilot panel flickered, and the yoke seemed to move of its own accord, as if guided by invisible hands. And the darkness outside pressed closer, thick and impenetrable, as if the night itself was alive and watching. The real terror was inside. In that cramped, humming cockpit, surrounded by dials and switches, Captain Reynolds realized he was utterly, terrifyingly alone, with something that wore the face of his friend. Maria couldn't take the tension any longer. She strode to the front, picked up the interphone and called the cockpit. The line buzzed, no answer. She tried again, still nothing. Dread seeped into her bones. The pilots always answered, always. Ben joined her, face pale. Anything? Maria shook her head. The cockpit was a silent tomb. I'm going to knock, she whispered. She approached the door, hand trembling. The metal was cold. She knocked, once, then again harder. Captain Reynolds, First Officer Evans, please respond. Only silence answered. The passengers watched, fear rising. Maria stared at the peephole, a tiny window into a growing nightmare. She knew what she had to do. She had to look. Maria pressed her eye to the peephole, heart pounding. The cockpit was dim, lit only by instrument glow. Captain Reynolds sat slumped, hands gripping the controls. He looked frozen. Her gaze shifted to the co-pilot's seat. First Officer Evans sat upright, head turned away, face hidden in shadow. He didn't move, not a breath, not a twitch. He was a wax figure in a pilot's uniform. Maria's stomach turned. The boy's words echoed. He doesn't have a face! She pulled back, stifling a scream. Ben grabbed her arm. What did you see? Maria could only shake her head, eyes wide with horror. The cockpit was compromised. Something else was in control. She looked at Leo. He watched her, solemn, unsurprised. He had known all along. They were alone in the sky, trapped with a faceless nightmare. A chime echoed. The seatbelt sign flashed on. Captain Reynolds' voice came over the PA, strained, terrified. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some instrument malfunction. Please return to your seats. The message cut off in static. The plane began to bank. Not a gentle turn, but a slow, sickening tilt. The left wing dipped toward black earth, the right toward starry void. The plane was turning away from Seattle, north into wilderness. Panic erupted. People screamed. A man rushed the cockpit door, held back by Ben and others. The illusion of control was gone. Maria clung to a seatback, the world tilting. She knew this was no malfunction. Captain Reynolds was a prisoner, forced to steer them toward doom. The turn continued, patient and deliberate. The engines whined, the airframe groaned. Leo watched, calm, as if he'd already accepted their fate. He'd seen the monster's face, or lack thereof. The plane leveled, pointing north. It flew on, a silver cross against the night, heading for nowhere. The passengers were powerless, the nightmare was in control, and the sky offered no escape. Captain Reynolds sat paralyzed, feeling the cold presence beside him. He didn't dare turn his head. The thing in the co-pilot's seat hadn't moved or spoken. Its silence was its threat. Reynolds felt his sanity fraying. Then he sensed it, the thing's attention shifting to him. He felt its gaze, a weight on his face. Do not look! His mind screamed, but the pull was too strong. He turned his head, he looked into Evans's face, and he screamed. The co-pilot had a face, but the eyes were bottomless pits of swirling darkness. In those voids, Reynolds saw everything, the crash, the fire, the silence. He saw the thing stepping from the wreckage, its work done. His mind shattered. The radio transmitted his final terrible scream. Flight 739 was...
It started small, just a whisper of something wrong, almost too subtle to notice. The kind of thing that, on any other day, might have been dismissed as nerves or a trick of the mind. Captain Ava Rostova felt it first, a shudder in the controls, not turbulence, but resistance. It was as if the plane itself was hesitating, questioning her touch. She nudged the yoke, expecting the familiar fluid response. Instead, the plane delayed, then jerked, overcorrecting with a force that sent a jolt through her arms. The movement was unnatural, almost defiant. Ben, her co-pilot, noticed the tension in her face and reached for the controls, trying to steady them. The plane ignored him as if it had stopped listening to human hands altogether. They were thousands of feet up, suspended between blue sky and earth, and suddenly not in control. The realization was instant and chilling, a sense of helplessness that pressed in from all sides. The plane was flying itself, but not on autopilot. The switch was off, the systems unresponsive. It was as if the aircraft had developed a mind of its own. Gauges flickered, then lied. Altitude, speed, fuel, none of the numbers made sense. The hum of the engines deepened, angry and unfamiliar, vibrating through the floor and into their bones. Eva radioed the tower, voice steady, but inside she was screaming. She recited their call sign, reported the malfunction, but the words felt hollow, powerless against the growing chaos. The plane banked sharply left. No one had commanded it. The horizon tilted, and for a moment gravity itself seemed to shift, pulling them sideways. In the cabin, fear would be spreading. Passengers exchanged worried glances, their conversations fading into uneasy silence. The flight attendants tried to mask their concern, but their eyes betrayed them. Ben flipped switches, nothing. The control panel blinked in a strange coded rhythm, as if the plane was speaking a language only it understood. Every attempt to regain control was met with silence or defiance. Eva looked out. The sky, once clear, now swarmed with unnatural fast-gathering clouds. It was as if the world outside was responding to the chaos within, mirroring their fear in the heavens. Cold dread crept up her spine. This wasn't a mechanical failure. It was something deeper, something that defied logic and training. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the plane itself was watching her. The plane was alive with something else, something terrible. Shadows seemed to move where there should be none, and the air felt charged, electric with anticipation. She gripped the controls, fighting panic. Her knuckles whitened, sweat beading on her brow, but she refused to let go. She was determined to fight, even if she didn't know what she was fighting against. The plane shuddered again as if it was making a choice. The vibrations grew stronger, rattling the seats and overhead bins, making every passenger acutely aware of their fragility. They were no longer pilots, they were passengers. The roles had reversed in an instant, and the cockpit felt smaller, more claustrophobic, as hope slipped away. And the flight had only just begun. Whatever force had taken hold of their plane, it was only getting started. The true nightmare was still ahead, waiting in the darkness beyond the clouds. The main screen flickered, then blacked out, plunging the cockpit into a sudden, unnatural darkness. For a moment, Eva and Ben could only hear the hum of the engines and their own quickening breaths, the familiar glow of their instruments replaced by a void that felt impossibly deep. Then, as if summoned from the depths of some forgotten code, strange, ancient symbols glowed red where flight data should be. The characters were nothing like the digital readouts they knew. These were jagged, almost runic, pulsing with a life of their own. Eva and Ben stared, uncomprehending, their training offering no explanation for what they were seeing. The cockpit, once a place of order and logic, now felt alien and unpredictable. The symbols pulsed, shifting and rearranging themselves, as if aware of their gaze, responding to their confusion, almost mocking their helplessness. Eva tried to switch back to navigation, her fingers moving with practiced urgency over the controls, but nothing happened. The buttons were dead beneath her touch, the system unresponsive, as if the plane itself had decided to ignore her. The red light filled the cockpit, casting monstrous shadows that danced across the panels and walls. Every surface seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, the air thick with static and dread. Ben, voice tight with anxiety, suggested a manual override. It was a desperate move, but it was all they had left. Eva flipped the autopilot switch. A distorted buzz blared through the cockpit, louder and more jarring than any alarm they'd ever heard. The sound seemed to vibrate in their bones, making the moment feel even more unreal. Autopilot engaged flashed in angry red letters, refusing to turn off no matter what they tried. The warning was relentless, a digital barrier between them and control of their own fate. They were locked out. The plane was flying itself, its systems sealed off from human hands. Every attempt to regain control was met with silence or static. The symbols spiraled, hypnotic on every screen, drawing their eyes in and making it hard to look away. It was as if the plane wanted them to watch, to witness whatever was coming next. Ben slammed the panel in frustration. Sparks flew, the smell of burning plastic filled the air, sharp and acrid. The cockpit was becoming a cage, its technology turning against them. Eva tried to steady him, but her own fear was raw, her hands trembling as she reached for his. They were alone, cut off from the world, with only each other for comfort. The plane was taking them somewhere unknown, its path a mystery written in those pulsing red symbols. Outside, the sky was a void, the horizon lost in swirling clouds. They were trained for emergencies, but nothing in their manuals had prepared them for this. This was beyond malfunction. This was possession. The cockpit felt smaller, the red glow more oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Every breath was heavy, every second stretched by fear. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming, a weight pressing down on their chests. They were pilots, trained to solve problems, but now they were passengers in their own plane. The plane was no longer a machine. It felt alive, aware, and intent on its own purpose, one that had nothing to do with their flight plan. It was a vessel for something else, something ancient and unknowable, and Ava and Ben could only hold on as the unknown drew them in. Eva peered out. The sky was now a swirling grey tunnel, clouds forming an impossible spiral. The plane plunged into the vortex, surrounded by darkness. The cockpit lights were their only anchor. The plane shook, not with turbulence, but with a rhythmic, unnatural force. Alarms blared, distorted into screams. The red symbols pulsed in sync with the shaking. Ben muttered, "This isn't weather." Eva saw fleeting shapes in the clouds, dark figures vanishing when she focused. The shaking intensified. Objects flew, the world spun. The plane circled deeper into the spiral, round and round. Eva's sense of direction vanished. They were lost. The storm was alive, and they were trapped inside it. The cockpit felt like a cage. The storm pressed in, suffocating. They were not alone in the grey. Something was waiting for them. A sudden sharp hiss filled the cabin, slicing through the low hum of conversation and the gentle whir of engines. At first it was just a sound, strange, out of place, but not yet alarming. But then the air itself seemed to shift, growing thinner, colder, as if the very atmosphere was being pulled away. With a mechanical clatter, oxygen masks dropped from overhead panels, swinging wildly in front of startled faces. Passengers lunged for them, hands trembling, but some masks dangled uselessly, their lifeline severed before it could even begin. Panic erupted. Some passengers managed to secure their masks, drawing in desperate breaths, while others found only silence. No air, no relief. The realization spread like wildfire. Not every mask would save a life tonight. In row 12, a man gasped, his vision tunneling as the world blurred and darkened. He reached for help, but his strength faded, and he slumped forward, unconscious before anyone could react. All around, bodies went limp, a cruel lottery of working and broken masks. Some passengers slumped in their seats, heads lolling, while others clung to consciousness, their eyes wide with terror. A mother, frantic, tried to fit a mask over her child's face, her hands shaking uncontrollably. But the child's eyes fluttered, and together they collapsed, the mother's last act a desperate attempt to save her child. The chaos faded into an eerie silence, broken only by the shallow, ragged breaths of those still awake. Fear hung thick in the air, heavier than the oxygen that was quickly running out. Flight attendants, trained for emergencies, moved quickly down the aisles, urging passengers to stay calm and secure their masks. But even they were not immune. One by one, some stumbled, their vision swimming, and collapsed beside the very people they were trying to help. The plane shuddered violently, turbulence rattling overhead bins and sending a fresh wave of panic through the cabin. Red warning lights flashed on every screen, casting an ominous glow over the chaos. The temperature dropped rapidly. Even those with working masks found it hard to breathe, their breaths visible in the frigid air. The cold bit had exposed skin, adding another layer of misery to the unfolding disaster. Faces drained of color, eyes glazed with shock and fear. Outside, lightning flickered through the windows, illuminating the storm that raged just beyond the thin metal skin of the plane. Those who remained conscious stared in horror at the unconscious forms around them. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional gasp or sob. It felt as if the very spirit of the cabin was being crushed by invisible hands. The storm outside pressed closer, thunder rumbling like a distant drumbeat. The plane was now a fragile shell, suspended between the fury of the skies and the terror within. Instruments in the cockpit showed a rapid descent, but the real loss was felt in the hearts of those aboard. The plane was losing more than just altitude. It was losing hope, losing the sense of safety that once filled its aisles. The cabin, once filled with laughter and conversation, now felt empty, abandoned. The seats seemed to echo with the memories of voices that had fallen silent. Darkness crept in, swallowing the last traces of light. The plane was losing its soul, and as the lights flickered and died, it felt as if the darkness itself was closing in, ready to claim everything that remained. For the conscious, a new terror began. Whispers, faint but everywhere. They seeped from the walls, the floor, inside their minds. The language was ancient, guttural, filled with malice. A young man clamped his hands over his ears, but the voices vibrated inside his skull. The whispers spoke of hunger, cold, endless emptiness. Passengers tried to block them out, but the voices grew louder, overlapping. A chorus of ghosts. Some wept, others prayed, but the whispers twisted their words, mocking them. Flight attendants, faces pale, tried to help but were powerless. One grabbed the intercom, but only a dry rasp came out. The whispers had stolen her voice. The air was thick with fear and secrets. The whispers promised terrible things. The living envied the unconscious. The darkness pressed in, alive with voices. The plane was no longer just a vessel, it was haunted. And the whispers were only getting stronger. At the back, a figure formed, tall, thin, made of darkness deeper than shadow. It had a human shape, but no face, just a smooth void. It stood listening, feeding on fear. The whispers seemed to emanate from it. It glided down the aisle, feet never touching the floor. Most passengers didn't see it. Their minds refused. The air grew colder as it passed, the whispers sharper. It was a blind spot in reality, a secret moving among them. Only Maya, frozen in her aisle seat, saw it coming. She stared, paralyzed, as the faceless thing approached. Her heart pounded, breath caught. She couldn't scream or move. The shadow drew closer, silent and inevitable. It was the source of everything wrong, and it was coming for her. Maya's hand shook as she grabbed her phone, desperate to record the horror. She unlocked it, the screen's glow a last link to normalcy. She aimed at the shadow, now only rows away. On the screen it was a perfect silhouette, more real, more terrifying. She pressed record. Instantly, searing pain shot up her arm. The phone glowed, then melted, fusing to her skin. Maya screamed, a sound of agony and terror louder than alarms or whispers. The scream shattered the silence, echoing through the cabin. Passengers stirred, eyes fluttering open. The whispers faded, pushed back by her raw human fear. Maya sobbed, clutching her burned hand. The shadow paused, as if savoring the chaos. The scream was a crack in reality. It was enough to wake the fainted. But it could not stop what was coming. Maya's scream jolted the unconscious awake. Confusion turned to terror as they saw Maya's injury and the open cockpit door. Ben, the co-pilot, stood in the doorway, blank, empty-eyed. The faceless figure pointed at him. then dissolved into black dust, sucked into the shadow. The figure grew darker, more solid. It turned, its blank face sweeping the cabin. Passengers stared, paralyzed by what they'd seen. A man erased from existence. Panic erupted. People screamed, struggled against seatbelts. There was nowhere to run. The shadow was among them, unstoppable. Hope died in that moment. The cabin was lost to fear. The faceless figure stood at the front, stronger now. It raised its arms. The red symbols on every screen pulsed violently. The plane lurched, dropping as if falling from the sky. Lights died. Emergency, screens, all. Darkness swallowed everything, thick and absolute. Only the storm's ghostly glow seeped through the windows. The plane groaned, passengers screamed, and the whispers returned, louder, everywhere. The ancient words filled the air, promising endings and emptiness. The shadow's presence was a spot of ultimate cold. This was the end, trapped, hunted, falling into the heart of the storm. There was no hope, no rescue, only the fall. The whispers grew, perfect in the dark. The unseen passenger was with them. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you notice your own breathing, the gentle creak of the overhead bins, the distant whir of the air system. It was the hour when even the most restless passengers finally surrendered to sleep. Senior flight attendant Clara, a veteran of 20 years, sensed something was off. She had seen every kind of night on a plane, but this one felt different. She knew the rhythms of a long-haul flight, the hum of engines, the soft snores, the occasional call button. The subtle shifts in energy that told her everything was as it should be. But this silence was heavy, unnatural. It pressed down on her as if the air itself was holding its breath. It was time for the pilot's check-in, a routine that brought comfort, a sign that all was well in the cockpit. Captain Davies was always punctual. He was the kind of pilot who inspired trust, who made the crew feel safe. He never missed a call, not once. His reliability was legendary among the crew. Clara walked to the galley, glancing at sleeping passengers as she picked up the intercom. Their peaceful faces made her hesitate for a moment. She pressed the button for the cockpit. 1 ring, 2 rings, silence. The seconds stretched, each one heavier than the last. Her heart beat faster. Maybe they were busy. Maybe turbulence. She tried to rationalize, but the unease wouldn't leave her. She tried again. Still nothing. The silence was beginning to feel personal, almost hostile. Clara looked at Ben, her junior colleague, who smiled unaware. He was new, still untouched by the weight of responsibility. The cockpit was a fortress. Nothing was supposed to go wrong in there. It was the safest place on the plane. Also, she'd always believed. But the unanswered call echoed in her mind. A silent alarm. It was a warning only she seemed to hear. Dread crept in. She tried one last time, her hand trembling. The intercom felt cold and unfamiliar in her grip. "Captain Davies, this is Clara. Please respond," she said, voice steady but tense. The words hung in the air, unanswered. Silence answered her, louder than any alarm. Something was terribly wrong. The realization sent a chill down her spine. She knew it in her bones. Instinct screamed at her to act, but protocol demanded caution. Clara set the phone down, forcing herself to stay calm. She couldn't let her fear show, not yet. She glanced at the cockpit door, its presence suddenly ominous. It seemed to loom larger than before, a barrier between her and the unknown. Ben noticed her unease. "Everything okay?" he asked, concern flickering in his eyes for the first time. "Just a routine check," she lied, masking her fear. She forced a reassuring smile, but her mind raced. She considered alerting the crew, but didn't want to cause panic. The responsibility weighed on her shoulders. Instead, she moved closer to the cockpit, listening for any sound. Every step felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. The silence pressed in, suffocating. It was as if the entire plane was holding its breath, waiting for her next move. She weighed her options. Protocol versus instinct. The rules were clear, but her gut told her something else. Clara's training warred with her intuition. She knew the manual by heart, but this felt like uncharted territory. She decided she had to act. Waiting any longer was no longer an option. She reached for the emergency key, her resolve hardening. The metal felt heavy, a symbol of the responsibility she carried. The safety of everyone on board depended on her. Every life in that cabin was now in her hands. She took a deep breath, ready to face whatever was behind that door. The moment felt endless, suspended in time. The unanswered call was no longer just a procedure, it was a warning. A message only she could interpret. And she was the only one who heard it. In that moment, Clara knew she had to be the one to act, no matter the cost. Just as Clara was about to hang up, her hand hesitated, a strange chill crawling up her spine. Suddenly, static crackled through the receiver, louder and more urgent than before. Not a voice, a burst of electric noise, then a guttural mechanical sound that seemed to vibrate through the handset. It was like metal grinding mixed with a wet, gurgling rasp, as if something inhuman was trying to speak. Alien, wrong. It chilled her to the core, making her breath catch in her throat. "Captain, is everything all right?" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible, trembling with fear. The sound twisted, almost forming words, but warped and broken, as if mimicking human speech. It was a mockery of speech, a digital growl that froze her blood and made her skin crawl. This was not the captain, not the co-pilot. Something else was in the cockpit, something she couldn't comprehend. Clara dropped the phone, the distorted noise sputtering from the earpiece, echoing in the silent galley. Ben looked up, alarmed. "Clara, what is it?" he called, his voice tense with worry. She stared at the cockpit door, unable to answer, her mind racing with dread. Her training kicked in. She had to see what was happening, no matter how terrified she felt. Grabbing the emergency key, her hands shook as she fitted into the lock, heart pounding in her chest. The safety of her passengers was all that mattered, and she forced herself to move forward. She turned the key and pushed the heavy door open, bracing herself for what she might find. The sight inside stole the air from her lungs, her body frozen in shock. Chaos. Horror. For a moment her mind couldn't process it, reality twisting into nightmare. A scream built in her throat but never came, trapped by terror. Dizziness overwhelmed her, and the world went black as she lost all sense of time and place. She collapsed onto the floor, a silent witness to the nightmare unfolding around her. Ben rushed to her side, panic rising in the cabin as passengers began to stir. The cockpit door hung open, revealing a glimpse of terror and the unknown beyond. The nightmare had just begun, and its shadow crept through the cabin. The silence was broken, replaced by fear and confusion among the passengers. And nothing would ever be the same for anyone on board that flight. Clara's body hit the floor with a soft thud. Passengers in the front row stirred, noticing Ben rushing to the galley. The cockpit door was ajar, and then they saw the blood. A dark red trickle seeped from under the cockpit door, staining the pristine floor. Eyes widened. A businessman nudged his wife. Whispers spread. The blood pooled, panic bubbling beneath the surface. Ben knelt beside Clara, trying to wake her, oblivious to the horror inside the cockpit. Passengers saw the blood and knew something terrible had happened. From the back, a tall man stood, Air Marshal John Rook. He moved with purpose, flashing his badge to a flight attendant. "Stay calm, keep passengers seated," he ordered, voice firm. Rook reached the galley, saw Clara, Ben, and the blood. He drew his weapon, steeling himself. Hijacking was the logical answer, but he was ready for anything. He pushed the cockpit door open, weapon raised. What he saw was worse than any hijacking. The scene inside would haunt him forever. The passengers watched, fear mounting. The blood was a warning, a crimson omen. The nightmare was real, and it was only beginning. Rook stepped into the unknown. The cockpit glowed with an eerie, unnatural light, casting strange shadows across the controls and panels. Captain Davies slumped in his seat, alive but bleeding, his breath shallow and ragged in the tense silence. Rook's eyes darted to the co-pilot's seat, and then froze, his heart pounding in his chest. A figure in uniform sat perfectly still, but it had no face, no eyes, no mouth, nothing. Where features should be, there was only smooth, blank skin, as if someone had erased its identity. Not a mannequin. It moved, unnaturally smooth like animation, joints bending in ways that defied logic. Rook felt watched, scrutinized by the faceless thing, as if it could see him without eyes. He kept his gun trained. "Don't move," he commanded, voice trembling despite his best efforts. The figure tilted its head, a chilling gesture of curiosity, as if studying him in return. It lifted a hand, fingers too long, joints bending at odd angles, the movement both deliberate and alien. Every movement was a violation of nature, a silent mockery of what should be human. Rook's instinct screamed. This was not human, not even close. The air grew cold, thick with dread, as if the temperature had dropped by several degrees in seconds. He had trained for hijackers, for emergencies, but nothing in his training prepared him for this. The faceless co-pilot sat, blank head tilted, fingers on the controls, as if waiting for a signal. It seemed to be waiting, reacting to his presence, aware of him in a way that was deeply unsettling. Rook felt he had interrupted something not meant for human eyes, a secret that should have remained hidden. The plane flew on, piloted by a nightmare, engines humming through the darkness. Rook's fear deepened. He was in the presence of something ancient and wrong, a terror beyond reason. The cockpit was no longer a sanctuary, but a prison filled with dread. It was a stage for the impossible, a place where reality bent and nightmares took form, and Rook was trapped in the front row, unable to look away. The faceless thing waited, and the plane flew on into the unknown. Rook had to act, get Captain Davies out and regain control. "I'm taking the captain," he said, voice firm. With Ben's help, he dragged the injured pilot into the galley. Rook slid into the captain's seat, hands hovering over the controls. He tried to disengage the autopilot. The switch wouldn't budge. Panic set in. The autopilot was locked. The navigation screen showed pulsing alien symbols, no familiar data. The plane's system had been rewritten in an unknown language. Rook tried every override, every button. Nothing worked. The plane flew itself, but it wasn't the plane in control. The faceless co-pilot sat motionless, blank face turned to the glowing symbols. Rook realized the chilling truth. The creature was the new pilot. Control was an illusion. The plane was a prisoner, just like everyone on board. Rook's training was useless here. The nightmare was in command. The flight path was no longer theirs, and the destination was unknown. Rook looked out the cockpit window. Nothing but swirling, unnatural clouds. The plane was trapped in a tunnel of churning grey vapor, isolated from the world. No sky, no sea, no horizon, just endless spiraling mist. It felt like another dimension, where normal rules no longer applied. In the cabin, passengers pressed against windows, seeing only the storm. No turbulence, just a silent, visual scream. Fear grew as the clouds twisted, sometimes forming distorted faces. Rook shook his head, but the feeling persisted. The clouds weren't just weather. They were a cage, a prison of mist and fear, closing in with every mile. The world outside had vanished. The plane was utterly alone. The passengers sensed it too. Panic simmered beneath the surface. The storm was alive and it was holding them captive. Escape was impossible. The prison of clouds tightened its grip. Suddenly, oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. The automated voice instructed calm, but there was no emergency. Many masks didn't work. No air flowed. Panic swept the cabin. Some passengers fainted from terror, not lack of oxygen. The air felt thick, charged with strange energy. A low hum vibrated in their bones, making them dizzy. Then the whispers began, faint at first, then stronger. Not in English, but in countless languages, some ancient and forgotten. Each passenger heard a different voice, but all felt dread. The whispers spoke of empty skies, falling stars, endless silence. The sounds slithered through the cabin, weaving fear. The source was nowhere, inside their heads, personal and terrifying. The plane had become a haunted vessel. The whispers were a warning, too late to heed. Fear was now their only companion. Amid chaos, one passenger stayed calm. Sarah, a vlogger. She saw the fainting, heard the whispers, and instinctively began to record. She glimpsed Rook stumbling from the cockpit, pale and shaken. Then she saw the faceless figure in the cockpit doorway. It stood for a second, then retreated into the shadows. Sarah's hands trembled, but she lifted her phone, determined to capture proof. The faceless figure appeared again, stepping into the galley. She hit record, focusing on the impossible sight. Perfect uniform, long fingers, blank face. She got a few seconds of footage, heart pounding. She tried to upload the video, desperate to send it out. The phone grew hot, searingly hot. She dropped it, watching as it sizzled and melted on the floor. Smoke curled from the plastic. The screen warped and turned black. The proof was destroyed. The message was clear, no witnesses. Panic erupted into hysteria. The passengers realized they were truly powerless. The faceless thing had erased their only evidence. The story would never be told. The nightmare tightened its hold. Hope melted away with the phone. Rook watched the phone melt, despair tightening in his chest. This was no ordinary hijacking. Something had total control. The plane, the weather, the technology, all obeyed the faceless thing. The passengers' screams faded into a distant roar. Rook turned to the cockpit, gun in hand, knowing it was useless. The faceless figure sat calmly, alien symbols pulsing on the screens. The plane began to descend, over the Atlantic, nowhere to land. The whispers grew into a chorus of despair, voices from 100.
The Boeing 777, Flight 739, touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, with a flawless, almost eerie precision. The wheels kissed the rain-slicked runway so gently that even seasoned spotters on the tarmac barely noticed the moment of contact. It was a landing that would have made any pilot proud, except, as it would soon become clear, there was no one to take credit for it. The landing was perfect, but inside the cabin, a heavy silence replaced the usual bustle. There was no applause, no relieved laughter, not even the rustle of seatbelts being unfastened. Instead, a strange, almost oppressive quiet filled the air, as if the entire plane was holding its breath. No welcome from the captain, no instructions from the crew, just 288 passengers sitting in confused quiet. Some glanced around searching for familiar cues, but found only blank stares and furrowed brows. The usual routine, the comforting structure of air travel, had vanished. The overhead bins remained closed, the call lights above each seat were dark, and the soft hum of the engines was the only sound. It was as if the entire aircraft had slipped into a dreamlike state, suspended between arrival and awakening. A strange mental fog seemed to hang over everyone, leaving them disoriented and unable to recall most of the 6-hour flight from Honolulu. Faces were pale, eyes unfocused, and conversations, if they happened at all, were whispered and fragmented. Memories were fragmented, boarding, takeoff, then a void. For most, the hours in the air were lost, replaced by a sense of time slipping away, as if the journey itself had been erased from their minds. Some passengers checked their watches, confused by the elapsed time, Others tried to recall the in-flight meal or a movie, but nothing came. It was as if the flight had been a single, unbroken moment of silence. The ground crew noticed something was wrong when the cockpit failed to respond to their calls. Normally, the pilots would acknowledge their arrival, but this time, there was only static. Standard procedure was broken. The radio remained silent. The cockpit windows, usually alive with movement, were still and dark, giving no hint of life within. As the jet bridge connected, emergency personnel opened the doors from the outside, expecting chaos but finding only a calm, bewildered crowd. The passengers sat quietly, as if waiting for permission to move, their faces etched with confusion and unease. The passengers were unharmed but deeply unsettled. Some clung to their carry-ons, others shuffled out in a daze, all of them searching for answers that no one could provide. The flight attendants' stations were empty, the galleys untouched. Not a single coffee pot disturbed, not a tray out of place. It was as if the crew had vanished mid-flight, leaving everything in perfect order. The cockpit, the heart of the plane, was locked in silence. No voices, no movement, just the cold, unyielding door separating the mystery from the world outside. When finally opened, it revealed the most chilling secret. No one was inside. The pilot and co-pilot seats were empty, the controls untouched, the flight log undisturbed. The plane had landed itself, a ghost ship arriving safely but with no one at the helm. The realization sent a ripple of fear through the airport staff, who struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. The mystery had only just begun. As night fell over the airport, the unanswered questions hung in the air, heavier than the rain outside. What had happened on Flight 739, and who, or what, had brought it home? The cockpit door stood ajar, its edges catching the faint glow of the emergency lights. Investigators, hearts pounding with anticipation, stepped inside, bracing themselves for what they might find. They expected to find the missing crew, perhaps unconscious, perhaps injured but certainly present. Instead, a chilling silence greeted them. Both pilot seats were empty. Captain David Reynolds and his co-pilot Elias Vance had vanished, leaving not even a hint of where they'd gone. It was as if the two men had simply evaporated into thin air, leaving behind only the memory of their presence. The cockpit itself was immaculate, almost eerily so. Every switch and dial was in its proper place, the flight controls set perfectly for landing. On the console, a cup of coffee sat untouched, its contents now cold, and a pair of sunglasses rested beside it, personal items that suggested the crew had only just been there. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned chairs, no scattered papers, and no evidence of foul play. The scene was so undisturbed that it almost seemed staged, as if someone had carefully erased all traces of what had happened. The last radio contact had been routine. Captain Reynolds' voice was calm and professional as he reported the plane's descent. There was no hint of distress, no coded message, no sign that anything was amiss. After that, only silence filled the airwaves. The landing itself was flawless, requiring a human touch and expert timing. Yet when the plane rolled to a stop, there was no one at the controls. The seats were vacant, the harnesses unbuckled, as if the pilots had simply stood up and walked away mid-flight. Even more unsettling, the entire flight crew, including 4 experienced attendants, had also disappeared. Not a single member could be found anywhere on the aircraft. Their logbooks, jackets, and personal effects were left behind, as if they'd only stepped out for a moment and intended to return. Nothing was missing, nothing out of place, except the people themselves. Passengers recalled the safety briefing and the friendly faces of the crew during drink service, but now, when asked to describe them, their memories blurred. The details of the crew's faces faded, replaced by indistinct shapes and shadows in their minds. It was as if the people responsible for their safety had become ghosts, present one moment, gone the next, leaving only a haunting sense of absence behind. Investigators pored over every detail, but the timeline was full of holes. There were no clues, no witnesses, and no answers, only a growing sense of unease and confusion. The mystery deepened with every passing hour. Who had landed the plane so perfectly? How could an entire crew vanish without a trace, leaving behind a perfectly functioning aircraft? The empty cockpit, bathed in the soft glow of the instrument lights, became a riddle that no one could solve, a silent testament to a disappearance that defied all logic and explanation. The FAA's investigation took a turn no one could have anticipated. As officials combed through the flight records, a shocking twist emerged. According to every available document, the co-pilot, Elias Vance, simply did not exist. The name that had been spoken by crew and passengers alike was nowhere to be found in any official registry. No pilot by that name was licensed anywhere in the world. The FAA's global search, which spanned international aviation authorities and databases, turned up nothing. It was as if Elias Vance had never set foot in a cockpit, let alone co-piloted a commercial flight. His name appeared on the manifest, but there was no record of his training, certification, or even existence. The paperwork was riddled with gaps. No background checks, no employment history, not even a digital footprint. The airline's systems had accepted a phantom for a critical role. IT specialists pored over logs and access records, searching for any sign of how this could have happened, but every trail led to a dead end. Was it a clerical error, a sophisticated hack, or something stranger? Theories swirled among staff and investigators. Some suspected a data breach, others whispered about identity theft, but none of the usual explanations fit the facts. The FAA's official statement only deepened the paradox. How do you find a man who was never there? The more they searched, the more the mystery seemed to grow, as if the very act of investigation erased what little evidence remained. Passengers were told that someone they distinctly remembered was, in fact, a fiction. This revelation sent shockwaves through the group, making them question not only the flight, but their own memories. How could so many people recall the same man, the same voice, the same uniform? The initial manifest had listed Vance, but now it was dismissed as a glitch. The airline's explanation did little to calm nerves. Was it really just a computer error, or was something more sinister at play? Two realities clashed: official denial versus lived experience. Passengers and crew insisted on what they saw and heard, while authorities clung to the records, which now showed nothing but a void. The truth seemed to be slipping further away, hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and red tape. Every new document only raised more questions, and every answer seemed to dissolve into uncertainty. The mystery of the missing crew became a bureaucratic enigma, a puzzle with no solution. Files were opened and closed, meetings held and adjourned, but the central question remained: who, or what, was Elias Vance? The official story only fueled more questions, leaving everyone involved to wonder if they had encountered a simple error, or something that defied explanation entirely. Investigators turned to security footage from Honolulu International Airport. The cameras showed Captain Reynolds arriving, checking in, and boarding the plane, alone. No second pilot appeared in any footage. Yet, the manifest and ground crew insisted there were two pilots. It was as if the co-pilot had materialized inside the cockpit, bypassing all security. Could Reynolds have flown the entire route solo? Possible, but against all regulations. Even if he had, it didn't explain his disappearance. Passengers recalled hearing two voices during the pre-flight announcement, but now doubted their own memories. The image of Reynolds walking alone became a haunting symbol. The contradiction between evidence and memory was impossible to ignore. The mystery only grew deeper. Investigators collected passengers' devices hoping for clues. Instead, they found widespread data corruption. Photos, videos, and audio from the flight were all distorted or erased. Images were warped, videos unplayable, and recordings filled with static. The corruption affected only files created during the flight. Older data was untouched. No evidence of hacking or electromagnetic interference was found. It was as if the flight had passed through a field that erased both digital and human memory. Forensic experts were baffled. The blackout mirrored the passengers' amnesia. Both human and electronic witnesses had been silenced. The digital void became another piece of the puzzle. The most unsettling evidence came from 8-year-old Maya's sketchbook. While adults struggled to remember, Maya had drawn throughout the flight. Her drawings showed a man in a pilot's uniform with a blank, featureless face. He appeared in the aisle by the windows, and even beside her seat. Maya insisted the quiet pilot was there the whole time, watching over everyone. She couldn't draw his face because she said he didn't have one. Her parents and other adults had no memory of this figure. The sketchbook became the only visual record of the faceless man. Investigators were unsettled but couldn't dismiss her account. Was Maya's perception clearer than the adults? Her drawings stood as a haunting counterpoint to the official record. The faceless co-pilot became the story's most chilling symbol. Global Skies Alliance quickly issued denials, blaming the manifest error on a clerical mistake. They claimed Captain Reynolds was certified for solo operations, a point hotly disputed by the pilots' union. The disappearance of the crew was attributed to panic and confusion. Passengers' memory loss was dismissed as mass hysteria. Generous compensation was offered in exchange for silence. The media hit a wall of legal threats, and the story faded from headlines. For the passengers, the official story felt hollow, a cover-up, not an explanation. In the aftermath, the passengers formed a private community, sharing memories and theories. They pieced together fragments, convinced the faceless man from Maya's drawings was real. Some recovered fleeting images of a silent figure moving through the cabin. They believed this entity had landed the plane after the crew vanished. The corrupted data became evidence of his presence. The group saw themselves as keepers of the true story, resisting official denial. The faceless co-pilot became a modern myth among them, a guardian or perhaps something more sinister. Their conviction grew stronger with each retelling. They speculated about his purpose: protector, ferryman, or collector of crews. The passengers refused to let the truth be buried. They became the living memory of Flight 739. Today, the mystery of Flight 739 remains unsolved, officially closed but never forgotten. Captain Reynolds and his crew were declared legally dead. The airline's story stands. For the passengers, the faceless co-pilot lingers, a shadow in their lives. Some report glimpses of a featureless figure in crowds, always vanishing when noticed. Was he a protector or something else? The questions remain. Maya's sketchbook is the only tangible evidence, a child's vision of the unexplainable. The legacy of Flight 739 is a chilling reminder. Some mysteries